Hello, we're Clever Llamas. My name is Maurits Veeman,
And I'm David Annett.
and we're here today to show you an integration of MarkLogic with Kendo UI.
With our history, with every release of MarkLogic since MarkLogic 7, we've always gone back and done a sort of a deep dive, some sort of project to break the back on it, a one-day project. This time, we'd already spent a lot of time looking at MarkLogic 11 and doing reviews of it, so we've already given enough back on that. This time we'll do it differently. We'll actually do a one-day pressure cooker on integration of Kendo UI and MarkLogic. And instead of choosing some other data set to use like we've done in the past, we decided to use MarkLogic itself as the source of our data. How we set this up, remember, one-day application. So how we set this up was basically, in the end, we want everything to deploy to MarkLogic, single application server with everything that we needed. So on my side, I set up rewriters to allow for the MarkLogic's management API, MarkLogic's REST API, the application that Marks is building, as well as any of our custom REST endpoints, our data service endpoints, to all be hosted on a single application server. Simple deploy, everything in one place.
From the UI perspective, we chose Vue.js as the platform to go, and Vue.js already has a built-in development server, which I used for building my mocks and running it off of that. Later on, I used the proxy to move that towards MarkLogic to directly talk to the endpoints that were provided by David, and use the build out of MarkLogic to be deployed directly to MarkLogic in the end, so that it is a married application running directly off of MarkLogic's app servers.
What we're going to do now is actually going to show you all the screens that we built throughout the day. We did some time-lapse photography during the day so we can see how it went in our little room that we locked ourselves in. And along the way, we'll talk about how it went.
So as an initial item, we took the donut chart from Kendo UI and visualized the range indexes available on MarkLogic as an aggregate.
Yes, had we used MarkLogic REST APIs directly, then there would have been some aggregate work to be done on the UX side. We decided not to do that. So instead, I actually did a custom REST endpoint that did the summary of all those range indexes, the total count of databases, the total count of all indexes of that type across the database. Had someone gone and drilled down further, then the next level of that could have been calls directly to MarkLogic REST endpoints directly.
Once we got going, we quickly found out that with the extensive amount of choices that is to be made with Kendo UI, first of all, the framework choices, Angular, React, Vue.js, which is the one that we chose for. There's also some other choices to make, such as native components versus wrapper components. As we were looking at the components available, we found out that we wanted to use the pivot component, which is one of their wrapper components. And later on, we quickly found that that's actually one that is not used with native stuff, but requires jQuery. And then there's also the choice of working with Vue 2 or Vue 3. So many choices, and basically at this point of the day, we decided to slow down a little bit, read the documentation, see what works for us in the short time frame. And then we decided to just stick with the Vue 3 and native components. So the next screen is all about document security within MarkLogic. And for the purpose of representing that, we chose the grid component from Kendo UI to just have a visual grid together with some grouping and aggregations. The pivot one would have been more suiting for this, but as we mentioned, we moved away from the wrapper components and only used the native components that are available, and that limited us a little bit in our representation. is about logs. We show you the logs of MarkLogic by harnessing the manage v2 logs endpoint, which doesn't require any customization. It's just out of the box available at MarkLogic. And we're using the regex pattern to search for particular log messages and visualize those log messages using several Kendo UI components. One being the chart component for visualizing the counts during the day, but also the grid component again to show you the actual messages that were found. And we've combined that with some date components for selecting the ranges, the chips components for selecting the patterns that you would like to see, as well as the icons to put some visuals on what the severity of these log messages are. This screen focuses on the MarkLogic audit entries. And for that, we use the chart component from Kendo UI to represent those. A component that by now we know well, we know the data that's required for it, but also a component that out of the box has the ability to turn data entries on and off to change the visualization of those and focus on the items that are most important for you as an end user.
Yeah, so the data for this was sourced from a single place, the MarkLogic audit log. It's in the same directory as all the other logs from MarkLogic. However, there's one interesting difference, is that the audit log, although accessible through MarkLogic Management API for our logs, does not translate to, does not automatically convert to JSON. So since I had to go ahead and convert it to JSON anyway, I decided that in the backend for the data service, I went ahead and did the aggregates. So the aggregates that you see are simply the sum of all the entries of that particular audit type.
As we got more familiar with Kendo UI throughout the day, its components, its subcomponents, how to work with data, what properties are available and such, we started to build more richer screens, such as this one, which is all about the caches available within MarkLogic.
This screen is very important to me. It's a high-level screen to show how caches are utilized and configured. The top of the screen is straightforward. It's the percentage of memory of the overall memory for each of the caches. Each of the dials represents a cache, so we'll just talk briefly on one of those dials. So the dial in the center, the needle in the center is actually the amount of memory used as configured for that. That's why the left-hand side, the right-hand side number is different for every one. And you'll notice that we have red and red on either side, left and right. And to me, that's very important if you take other numbers into account, which we'll describe in a minute. Because it's not only about having your cache used completely, and then you're out of cache, you're out of memory for your caches, which will cause various issues. It's also important to understand if you have a cache that's over-provisioned, you've given it resources that it doesn't need. And that's where the next part comes in. The bar across the bottom with the up to three little triangles that you see, that's actually, we've calculated that on our hit ratio. And so what I did is I have the average hit ratio is being shown, the minimum hit ratio, and the maximum hit ratio. And that's actually per stand. So to really find out what's going on, you'd want to dig further down. But on a high level, it lets us know what's happening. So if I have my hit ratio all at 1, and I have a cache at 50% usage, well, that's probably sounding pretty healthy. If I have a hit ratio at 22 or 22% and my cache is full, then I need to think about changing my code or changing my caches. If I have my hit ratio at 1 and my cache is only 10% used, well, then I have to think that I've probably over-provisioned that one. I need to look at it differently. And you also see on that one last item on there, which is the number of stands, the number of partitions. That becomes important when you think about CPU usage and memory usage as well, because there's implications on how many partitions you have for which you split up that cache. The data for this actually came from two sources. The data for this came from the configuration side and the use of the caches themselves, but then we had to go down to the forest stand information to get the information related to hits and misses. All of that's combined into a packet that Mars consumes. So in the end, we have 5 data points that we're bringing to drive this screen. So by the end of all of this, we become quite complex. The day is over. We're tired. It's time to go home.
But we learned a lot, specifically with Kendo UI being new to us. There's a lot of components in there, each component having their subcomponent. But once you get to know them, there's actually a whole rich set of items to use. A lot of them are reused with other components. And actually, everything can be managed and changed. There's a lot of abilities to go your own way, do some styling, add some additional items. Wonderful stuff for one day. There's a lot to show, a lot to see, and yeah, it definitely made us wonder what we would be able to do in a couple of weeks, even. What other screens were possible, or what drill downs could be provided. So yeah, we're happy with this. We're tired, but it was a day well spent.